Hey, this is the NixMyth podcast. We are your hosts, Nick Smith
and Kylie Jo Smith, and today we have an interview.
So we got brother Aaron M. It's Michael, right?
Yes, sir.
I wrote Aaron M. and I was like, Aaron Michael Garcia, author of Burn Notice. And before we get started too much, if you're watching this right now, if you're listening to this, share it. So Get on social media, get on whatever platform you prefer, and just share this with everybody because you're not going to want to miss this interview. We have Aaron M. Garcia. He is a father of 3, husband, author, speaker, founder of SOS Ministries, nurse practitioner, and CrossFit enthusiast. I'm trying to get my swallow on. That's why I'm sitting here.
Oh, shoot.
Out right there so that I feel like I can fit in the group. Aaron has authored 3 books, one being Coincidence or God, the second being Silence the Noise, 15 Days of Inspiration to help strengthen students, and his new book, Burn Notice, which will be available on ebook from July 7th, correct?
Yes.
And then it's going to be hitting the shelves sometime this fall. Aaron, is there anything else you want to plug before we get into the interview? I want people to know right at the beginning who they're dealing with and that you're the real deal.
Yeah, man. So first off, I think it'd be really good to just let them know about my website real quick.
Yes.
It's authoramgarcia.com. You can go on there. You can look at my blogs. You can check out my testimony, my video, which we'll talk about my testimony, I'm sure. All my books, ways to get my books. And what's really cool is if you go to my website now, you can actually sign up for my subscription and get my first book, Coincidence or God, absolutely free to download to your Kindle. It's just a gift I want to give out to people. We've released over 500 books of that book into the prisons now. It's reaching people in prisons for Jesus, and it's just one of those gifts I wanted to give to people. So if they want to go to my website and check that out, it's authoramgarcia.com. Check it out, man. It's a cool place to know about me and to know about what the Lord's doing in my life. So
author A.M. Garcia, you heard it here. Go and get that book. I'm going to do that because we're privileged to preview Burn Notice, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But now I want to read Coincidence of God. Like, now we need that in our lives. So I'm going today, and I'm going to go ahead and download that. Plus, I got a new little Kindle, so I'm excited to read that. So that's
awesome.
Thank you so much for coming onto our podcast. So kind of our milieu, as we shall say, because I like to make up words that I think I know the meaning of.
No, that's a real word.
It's a real word.
You didn't make it.
Well, there we go. Because I like to use words I don't know the meaning of. We talk about real life, no myth. And brother, when we were reading your testimony in the book, when we watched your testimony on your website, it's true, or it's apparent is the word, that that's what you're living, man. You're living this real with Jesus life, and there's not any pretense about who you are. And so we want to jump into a little bit about your testimony and who you are before getting into Burn Notice. And so we just want people to know a little bit about you. Again, go to authoramgarcia.com and watch his testimony. It's so powerful. But you said in there, in your testimony, there was a part where you said you were living in this life, you were in addiction, you had this roommate that said you didn't belong, you got kicked out of this drug house. Can you fill in like how God took you from this place of such brokenness to now you're a professional, a medical professional, you're married, children, career, missionary. What did God do in that season between I need you to change this, Lord, to now I'm sharing the gospel?
Yeah, so it's one of those stories of redemption and hope, right? Stories that many people hear about. They may not know the Lord, but they come across people who've experienced God and things like that. And my story, to just kind of build up this testimony, started at age 16. I grew up in a good home. I had a good Christian upbringing. We went to a Methodist church. It was very tiny. Everybody there knew one another, which was really kind of cool. It was like a big old family. And what happened was at age 16 is my parents gave me my first vehicle. And it was cool. It was a Toyota Tercel. It was like a Prius, like this. If you got to think of a modern day vehicle,
Yeah.
it was cherry red. It was, what was so cool is it was mine. My parents had bought my vehicle for me. But what happened was that I started wanting worldly things. I started wanting to become recognized, and that only brought in bad people. And so they wanted to use me for my vehicle and things like that. And so what happened is that I started using drugs at age 16. I experienced with marijuana, moved from marijuana to trying like LSD, ecstasy, pretty much everything besides all the really hard drugs like heroin and stuff like that. But regardless, is my mind and my thoughts started to change. I ran away from home 2 times. I ended up in juvenile detention. I even unfortunately wrote a bomb threat on a desk back in high school, which was really just a joke, and it turned into this terrible nightmare.
Wow.
And so after high school, my parents wanted me to go to college. I didn't want to go to college. So I started working some dead-end jobs, and I met some people, and they invited me to this house. And I really wasn't using drugs after high school. I was really trying to just kind of walk a fine line. And what happened is I went to this house where I was invited, and I'll never forget, it was a duplex. And I went into this house, and I turned the corner where they brought me in, and I walked down the steps, and the carpet was red. And then the furniture was black. And if you had to think of a place where the devil would reside,
wow,
that's where this place would be.
Yeah.
I called it the Devil's Den.
Wow.
And I went down these stairs, and it's like, that moment where you're in a bad spot, where this is your discernment, your intuition, if you will, starts to build up inside you. That's what I was feeling. And I remember I turned the corner, and this entire downstairs basement where this man's house was full of drug addicts. Everyone was using, they were, using meth. It was methamphetamines they were using. And he invited me over to the bar downstairs, and I fell right back into addiction. He asked me to move in, and me being naive and just thought it would be a cool idea, moved in. And that's where really my life I started to lose my life. I started using drugs. I was drug dealing. I was a manipulator. I was prideful. I'd make pretty much anyone do what I wanted them to do. I would be considered powerful in the drug world. And I knew I was hanging out with some bad people. There were manufacturers who were manufacturing methamphetamines, large cocaine dealers, people who had guns, knives. And you gotta understand, I came from a pretty easy household. Growing up in church, I never really was exposed to this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I lived in this house for about a year. And I started losing weight. I started becoming paranoid. I knew at one point in time that I was hitting rock bottom. And I detached myself from my parents. My parents knew I was on drugs. It was just a really, really poor moment for me. And there was one night I was in the Devil's Den, and I knew that my life was at rock bottom, and I knew that there were people after me. I owed money to a lot of people because my addiction was running wild. And I had this fear just building up inside me. Yeah. And I'll never forget the evening that this happened. I was in the Devil's Den, and the place is usually full of people. But for some reason on this evening, the place was empty. And I didn't know God. I didn't know anything really about him. I mean, I went to church, but I doodled in the back. I was never really devoted to him. I went to church camp and did all the churchly type duties that my mom wanted me to do. But my heart was never in it. And so technically I didn't really know God. And so, but I knew on this evening that there was something that needed to change in my life. And I'll never forget, this weight came over me. And I remember I just collapsed to my knees and I was sobbing. And these words just came out of my mouth. I said, God, if you are real, I need you to come into my life, and I need you to change it forever. I don't want this life anymore. Wow. And it would be a prayer, if you will, that echoed into eternity. So 3 days passed, and I don't know what I was doing. I don't remember if I was getting high or selling drugs, but I remember it was 3 days. And on that third day, I woke up, and I was in the front yard of this house. And the people who had invited me into the house to live with them were pointing their finger in my face. and they said, get out of here. They said, you don't belong here anymore.
Mm.
And it was crazy to me because I wanted out of that lifestyle, but I had cultivated it and built it up to where it became comfortable to me that there was almost like no way out, almost like a prison cell. Like I was begging the guard to let me out of the prison cell, but as soon as he opens the gate, I'm like, wait a second, you're letting me out? Like, where am I supposed to go?
Yeah.
And I remember I got into my vehicle and there was something inside me that said, go home, you'll find safety there. Because I was technically homeless and I had a trash bag in my back seat of my life. That's how my life really turned out, was that this big drug dealer, all he had left was a trash bag of his life. And so I showed up at my mom's front door and she looked at me and she didn't recognize her own son. I lost so much weight. I had sores all over my face, and she let me in the house and I asked to move back in. I was hallucinating. I'd been up for like a week. I was really a sick man. And my mom said no, but my dad was in the background. He said, well, he's our son. Like, we can't let him go. Look at the condition he's in. And my mom said, fine. If he gets clean, he can stay here. And I made the decision to get clean. I went through withdrawals for a few days. And I remember this is a turning point for my life where I opened my phone and there were people with voicemails and text messages who wanted me to come back to my old life. And I shattered my phone in an instant.
Praise
and
God.
from that day, everything changed for my life.
Praise God.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So many awesome moments in your testimony that are just preaching, man. There's, starting out, moving into the devil's den, and that's when everything changed, you know what I mean? And just so many good moments. God did some amazing stuff, and I'm just thanking God for his prevenient grace, just moving on your heart and drawing you out of that darkness, you know what I mean? And lifting you from that veiled state.
Honestly, there's so many things in the book that, hearing your testimony, we watched your testimony first, and then reading through it, it was so cool to see how God placed you in positions to write that book. But first he brought you to that place where you're desperate. God, get me out of here. You had to see and experience and smell and taste all these things for yourself.
Yeah. And
it just seems like God was planting some compassion. He was planting things like, you're going to need this one day. You didn't know it then. Like, by the time you got to, your first mission, and it's like, oh my God, because you have those eyes to see and those ears to hear, to where you're walking in, you're not like, oh my gosh, I can't touch anything. It's dirty. You're like, no, I've been here. I know I know what this is.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to hear in your testimony, to hear and to see you retell it. It's like, man, this really is real for you. So that when you talk about the things you talk about in your book, you're not saying it from a place of, you're not pontificating, to use a word. Like, you're not like, it'd be really great if we could do this, church.
Yeah.
You're like, if we do this, I guarantee you, because you've seen it and you've done it, I guarantee you we'll see things differently. It's just amazing. It's really cool.
Yes.
Well, and that's good. Let's transition into the book because, man, it was a really, really good read.
Yeah.
We were reading it side by side, and just every now and again, one of us would say something like, wait, where are you at? What part did you, okay. Yeah.
Don't tell me.
Yeah. And so we jump back and forth without giving the story away, because I want everybody to pick up this book.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the title, Burn Notice?
Yeah. So Coincidence or God, I wrote in 2015. So it's actually been out for about 5 years. I self-published that. The Lord told me to write a book about my testimony. And I was like, Lord, I'm not a writer. I'm not an author. I got a C in English, guys, in high school, just to kind of give you an idea here. He said, Aaron, write a book and I will take it places it's never been before. And I was like, for 3 months, like Jacob, man, like wrestling with God, like, nope, ain't doing it. Not this guy. Pick someone else.
Yeah.
And one day after church, my wife was extremely tired, which was kind of out of the norm for her. And she laid down on the couch and there was a laptop that was opened across the way on the bar in the kitchen. And the Lord said, now. And I literally went over there and it was almost like it became a part of me. And I typed out the first 3 chapters of Coincidence or God.
Wow.
After I finished the book Coincidence or God, it went on to become an Amazon bestseller in both an inspiration and spirituality, which was awesome. Praise God for that. But then the Lord said to me, Aaron, I need you to journal the next 3 years of what I'm about to do in your life. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I just started, like, things started happening, right? Ministry started happening. Hearing his voice started happening. And I'll never forget, before I even wrote the book, I remember, like when you walk into a movie theater and there's this like big display above you of the title of the movie. Yeah. And the title was Burn Notice. And I was like, that's weird. Like, I knew there was a TV show a long, long time ago called Burn Notice. Yeah. But that was about it. And so anyways, so 3 years passed and the Lord said, the time is now. And so I went through my journal of 3 years of the things that God did for me. Yeah. And so, I wrote it out. I wrote it back a couple of years ago, Burn Notice, and I actually self-published it again. I did my another self-published book, but something inside me was stirring, and the Lord told me basically that this was a message that needed to reach his believers, not just believers, but non-believers, to show the actuality, proof that God is alive and that he works in his people. Yeah. And so in order to get signed by a publishing company, you have to write a book proposal, and then you have to send out that book proposal to literary agents, scouts basically, for publishers. Mm. And so I typed out a book proposal. I did some investigation. I researched on how to do that, and I wrote it up. I sent out a whole bunch of emails to literary agents and got no response, or I got, thank you for inquiring, but at this time we're not going to take on this project. So I kind of laid it off for a little bit, but then the Lord stirred me up again. A few months later, he says, do it again. Mm-hmm. And so I sent out a whole bunch more book proposals, and I'll never forget, I got an email from a guy named Michael Eberling out of Colorado, who's a big literary agent for Hay House and like all these Penguin House and big publishing companies. He said, I believe that your book has potential for high reach, and I have a publishing company that I would like to connect you with. Would you be okay with that? I'm like, well, yeah, that'd be awesome. He said, the CEO of Morgan James Publishing out of New York, David Hancock, he would like to speak with you. And so next thing you know, I'm interviewing with this CEO of a publishing company, and a couple weeks passes, and he made me send in the book and all those things, and his whole team like read it, loved it. And a couple weeks later, I got a phone call, and I got signed with Morgan James Publishing out of New York. And so here we are, and the book is done. Yeah. And now we're just waiting for release date. And so July, it's going to be on ebook on Amazon. You can actually go to Amazon now and look at it. It's actually there for pre-order. So if people want to pre-order it, they can. But then it'll be on bookshelves this fall. All bookshelves across the nation. So kind of one of those cool God moments, right? Yeah. He who is faithful with little will be granted much. Okay. And I've learned from God's experience that you do the little things for God, he'll give you more of a platform. And not a platform per se to like puff you up or anything like that, but to give you more for his kingdom's sake.
Mm-hmm. Amen. So, yeah. Amen. As you were telling me about that, about sending the proposals. Thank you. I was thinking of Elijah in the rain. You know what I mean? He's like, hey, go look. And dude goes and looks, like, I don't see anything. He's like, all right, go look again. Like, go look. And he's like, oh, wait, I see something. There's something coming. And so, man, it's crazy how obedience, and you mentioned that in the book, talking about how obedience comes first before opportunity. Yeah. And how we're called to be obedient to the Lord's leading. And in that, he then provides the opportunities. And man, your testimony, your life is such an image of that, of being obedient to what God is calling you in the moment, and allowing him to work out the details. Kaija, did you have a question? I feel like I'm asking all the questions.
No, I put down some notes from reading that I loved, and it goes with what you're talking about with the publishing and starting small. There's so many believers, I think, who are in that place of like, well, Lord, what do I do, or where do I go, or how do I? And yes, people want a step by step. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We don't have 10 steps to It's a ministry.
Right.
But I love what you said at one point in your book. You said, if you don't reach people on an individual level, God will never give you more opportunity.
Yeah, that was good.
And like, again, it's just so clear that you're speaking from experience in this. What you said, it's like, look, not saying it like, hey, just so you know, hey, little disciple here, just so you know. It's like, I've lived this. Yeah, and it's just, I love that part. It really spoke to me. I was like, oh yes, that's so true. Yeah. And for believers who are struggling in ministry, for leaders who are like, Lord, I just want that influence, or I just want that reach. I mean, it's so simple and so practical. Okay, well, reach people, obey the Lord, and what's he telling you to say to that person? And I think a lot of American Christianity is at that place where it's like, does that really work? Is that really how it is? Does God really say that?
Just love people? That's weird.
Yeah.
What do you mean? And so, like, I guess my question would kind of be like, was there a point where that was so clear, where you kind of had this like kind of throwing off the wet blanket of like, yes, this is it? Was there an experience that you had? It was like, that's what it is, Lord. That's all I have to do. Can you describe that?
Yeah. So I love, if we can talk about Jesus a little bit, let's talk about Jesus. So what was Jesus talking about when he said, leave the 99 to find the one lost sheep? And it says that heaven goes up on the other. Okay. All right. We're back. Okay. So Jesus talks about leaving the 99 sheep to find the one lost sheep, right? That heaven rejoices over that one lost sheep than the 99. So I was driving, we went to a conference, a men's conference, and it's in the book. And I'll never forget, it was the last day of the conference, and I pulled up to the stoplight, and there was this license plate. I don't know why, but my eyes just gazed down at the license plate. And the license plate said, win one. And I was like, like when the Holy Spirit just hits you like a sledgehammer?
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, wow, like revelation from God.
Praise God.
And the Lord started to speak to me. He said, Aaron, it's not about the crowded stage. It's not about the thousands of people that when you're on a platform that you can speak to these people. He says, it's about the one. He says, if you can reach one, that one can reach others and so forth. Just like seed, right? So like if you plant seed in people, that seed eventually becomes a branch, right? And then fruit, and then birds come and perch themselves on those branches. And so we want to be people who reach individuals on a personal basis, because if we reach the individual, that individual it's almost like we had so churches, there's a lot of people there, and it's really hard to get everybody's life and where they're at and things like that. So when we have home groups, I've noticed that we're able to reach people more on a personal level, and that impacts them a lot more than if we were among the crowd.
Yeah.
And so just like Christ, he had crowds that would surround him, but he would detach himself from the crowds. He would even talk to the disciples one-on-one and reach their hearts. And in the same sense, Jesus would reach the hearts of individuals out in the marketplace. So I think as Christians, I think a lot of people are looking for numbers when God's saying, why don't you just reach people on an individual level?
Yeah.
Pour your time into them, steward into them, plant seeds into them, check up on them, make sure they're okay. And then from that, people will see your good works and give glory to the Father.
Yeah. Amen. So well, man, Aaron, there's so many good things. I want to just hit some of your marching orders. Because that was so good. It was awesome to see that at the end. We're very big in the podcast about giving people practicality, things they can actually take with them and use in their everyday life. The first thing people need to do to take with them is to go to your website, Garcia.com. Second thing, they need to go to Amazon. They need to pre-order your book. But what other marching orders do you have for anyone listening or watching this right now?
So one of the things that always comes to my mind throughout these seasons of life is I always know there's more. So some people think that coming to God is just, going to church and listening to the pastor preach and be inspired by that, which is really good. But if we don't apply what we receive, what's taught to us, and we don't use it in our everyday life, really a lot of times then we become stagnant, right? We just show up week after week after week. And as I talk about the book, the Lord desires obedience more than sacrifice.
Amen. Yeah.
So sacrifice is giving up the things that you don't really care to keep. Obedience is giving up the things that you do care to keep.
Oh,
if that makes any sense.
That's good.
So obedience is the hard things, right? Well, I love you, Lord, but
Right.
you know, I'm willing to go to church, but you want me to pray for someone? You want me to give to someone? You want me to lay down my life? You know, the Bible says that he who wants to save his life will lose his life.
Right.
And really that's about practicality of knowing that we have to lay down our lives, our self-motives, our self-passions, our self-desires, what we want for our lives. And so really a marching order today, maybe when people are listening to this podcast, is maybe it's time to step outside the four walls of the church.
Amen.
Maybe it's time to impact people in your workplace. Maybe it's time to reach neighbors in your neighborhood who maybe don't know Jesus, or maybe who are believers who are struggling. And then back to that individual level is maybe we should reach out to them and check on them, make sure they're okay. There is something that, and this is what Burn Notice is all about, it's recognizing this most inner fire purpose that's in your soul.
Yeah.
There are passions and purposes that God has ordained, who he's put inside you, gifts. I was reading 1 Corinthians today that Paul was talking about spiritual gifts that God has given us.
Yeah.
Well, gifts are meant to be opened. So we need to take what God has given us and we need to utilize that in our everyday walk of life. And that's really what Burn Notice is.
Yeah.
It's taking what God has given us, our spiritual gifts, obeying, listening to his word, and then going out and doing it in our everyday walk of life. And not just waiting for next Sunday for something else to be received again. Like, let's get received, stirred up, and then let's go out.
That's good.
That's good. Brother Aaron, this has been a blessing. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have notes from what I was reading because I was like, oh, that's so good. That's so, like, I want to put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, I know I've heard so many believers say, you know, I don't know where to start, or I don't know, like, how do I, and what, I don't have anything to offer. And I mean, even what you reference, like the word tells us we all are gifted. Yeah. And your gift builds up someone else's gift, builds up someone else's gift. Like our gifts are meant, like you said, to be open, to be shared, to be celebrated. And one of my favorite things you said, it was early on in the book. You said all love needs is a voice. And that hit me because so many times we think, well, what loving means, I need to fill in the blank. I have to have lots of money, or I have to be able to do these things in order to love someone. And so much of what you share in the book and what you've shared in your testimony is loving is just speaking it. It's just that voice. And for us as believers, we know that voice first is the voice of God. And calling and stirring in us things that we don't understand. And God, how is this going to work? But it's his love that is moving through and he's speaking. And I just loved that. And it's so simply empowering.
Yeah.
Yes.
All love needs is a voice. All you have to do is obey.
Yeah.
And all you have to reach is the one. Like, it's stuff that we know in the church. We preach it. But hearing it and seeing it in action is just so empowering. So thank you for that. Because I really believe that's going to reach people. They're going to read that and be like, I thought I had to do all these things, but all I have to do is one simple thing.
Yeah.
Right. If there's one thing if there's a how-to or a step to the system, here's the first and foremost, and this is where Burn Notice really took off for me, having a hunger for God. When you have a hunger for God, it says that he will give you the desires of your heart.
Right. Yeah.
Your main desire is God. It says that love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Come on now.
So we have to develop passion, hunger, drive, thirst, whatever you want to call it, for God. When you do those things, something seems to happen. It's like almost like God opens up the cellar and he just like reveals all of these things that he wants to give you. And that's where the gifts begin to get stirred up, because burn notice is that passion, that fire that's in you. You notice it, you recognize it, and the Lord wants you to utilize that gift in your everyday walk of life. And so if there's a step program that we're trying to do here, or that people are wanting, 3 steps, how about 1 step?
Amen.
Develop a hunger for the Lord, and he will establish your steps.
Come on now.
Amen.
Now you're preaching, Aaron. Now you're preaching.
Yeah.
Brother, that's good.
Yes.
Man, God bless you. I'm just praying that after all this pandemic and quarantine, I'm praying that when this hits, because God already knows the time that your book's going to hit the shelves. He's already ordained that. You know what I mean? And so I'm praying that this is going to be received by those that need to hear it the most. After being stuck in a house for months or weeks or however long they've been stuck and dealing with the Lord on personal levels, I just pray that God is going to increase people's desire for him. And I pray that your ministry will be a part of that, brother. I think that God's doing amazing things. We're seeing it in other people. We're seeing it in other pastors and other ministries. And your book is a testimony to what God is wanting to do in the hearts of those that are willing to say yes. And so thank you for saying yes and writing the book.
Yes.
Thank you for saying yes and coming on the podcast. We're just blessed to have you.
Yeah. And for our listeners and watchers, this book will inspire you.
Yes.
There's something powerful about testimony and reading the Word of God alive and active, because it is alive and active. So please pre-order Burn Notice. You need to have this book. You need it in your life, and you're going to want to share it with other people. It's going to plant seeds in you. You're going to see fruit from this that I just know God's going to bless it. I know he's going to bless it in your life. So please go and pre-order this book. And
there's some great quotables in there for you pastors.
There really are.
I mean, looking
for a little sermon for Sunday coming. I can feel it.
There's series. I was like, ooh, that's good. That would be good on a t-shirt. That would be good on
gosh.
Marketing.
Here we go. Here we go.
No. I know it's hard to get out of that mindset. Like, ooh, that's good.
Oh, marketable. Let's make that marketable.
Put a thing on.
Well, really, it was more personal. I was like, I want that on a pillow. I want that pillow on my bed.
Right.
I want to cross stitch it for me.
Right.
God bless you, man. We are so thankful that you decided to share your testimony with us, and we're gonna keep tracks. We're gonna keep promoting your stuff. So keep letting us know when stuff pops up. And we just thank you for being a friend of the podcast and coming on and sharing your story, brother.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much. I know we talked about this earlier, but you two are very genuine. I feel the love of God in both you guys. And I just want to say thank you for doing this podcast and allowing me to come on here and share my story. And hopefully today it really influences some people. So,
amen. Well, God bless you so much, Aaron. And again, like I said, we would love to have you back, man. Once it's out, let's come back and talk about it. Talk about what it's doing in people's lives.
Let's do it. Let's sharpen iron.
Let's make it happen, brother. Well, God bless you. Well, this is what? How do we go?
I have to do it.
Okay, your turn. I messed it up. So go. It's on you.
All right. This has been the NixMyth podcast. We hope you've gotten a dose of real life.
No myth.
Be blessed.